Police lights flashing against the twilight sky over Helvetia. A padlock slapped onto the main gate of the farm just days before the most critical time of the year. The shocking evidence that proves the so-called safety crisis was actually a calculated setup designed to destroy Amy Roloff is finally coming to light, and you won't believe who made the call that started it all. Welcome back to the channel, where we dig deeper than the cameras ever could. We are receiving insider reports regarding a situation that unfolded at Roloff Farms that the production crew may have been ordered to keep under wraps. This isn't just about family drama anymore. We are talking about alleged legal interference, financial sabotage, and a power play so ruthless it threatens to erase Amy's legacy permanently. We need to talk about the incident that changed everything. According to exclusive theories circling the farm's inner circle, the chaos began exactly 14 days before the start of the lucrative pumpkin season. For decades, this season has been the lifeblood of the Roloff empire, generating the bulk of the revenue that keeps the farm operational for the rest of the year. But this year, the gates didn't open. Instead, a fleet of county vehicles, accompanied by safety inspectors and local law enforcement, descended on the property. The initial reports claimed this was a routine spot check, but insiders suggest otherwise. Routine checks don't happen with police escorts, and they certainly don't happen based on random selection 2 weeks before opening day. The narrative being spun was that an anonymous tip had been submitted to the County Building and Safety Division, alleging severe, life-threatening structural failures on the specific portion of the land that Amy still had access to and drew income from. Notice the precision of that allegation. The inspectors didn't go to the wedding barn. They didn't inspect the new build Matt has been obsessed with. They went straight for the attractions essential to the pumpkin patch tour: the wagon route, the old western town facades, and the bridge crossings. The farm was immediately slapped with a cease and desist order. The attractions were red tagged. In a matter of hours, the projected income for October, hundreds of thousands of dollars, was effectively frozen. For Amy, this wasn't just a bad day. This was financial ruin. Without the pumpkin money, her liquidity to maintain her share of the assets or even to negotiate a buyout would be obliterated. She would be forced to sell, and she would be forced to sell fast. This brings us to the reaction on the ground. Sources allege that while Amy was in a state of absolute panic, frantically calling contractors and trying to understand how the farm she has lived on for 30 years suddenly became a death trap, Matt's reaction was curiously rehearsed. Instead of shock, there was immediate blame. The narrative shifted instantly to Amy's alleged negligence. We are hearing reports that Matt was quick to point out that these were areas Amy was responsible for checking, despite the fact that maintenance crews are usually shared. The speed at which Matt distanced himself from the liability suggests he might have known this was coming. But the real smoking gun isn't Matt. It's the behavior of the new power player on the farm. We need to look closely at Caryn. While Amy was drowning in red tape and legal threats from the county, witnesses claim Caryn appeared on the scene with a demeanor that was unsettlingly calm. She wasn't scrambling. She wasn't surprised. In fact, she seemed prepared. Within hours of the inspectors slapping the red tags on the attractions, theories suggest Caryn presented a fully formed solution. She allegedly told Amy that fighting the county would take months, time they didn't have, and that the fines alone would bankrupt the business account. Then came the pitch. Reports indicate Caryn mentioned she knew a developer or an investor who could take the liability off their hands immediately. A quick sale, a way to stop the bleeding. It was presented as a mercy, a way to save Amy from the stress of a lawsuit and the embarrassment of a public shutdown. But when you step back and look at the timeline, it is terrifying. The inspectors arrive at 9 a.m. The shutdown happens at 11 a.m. By 2 p.m., Caryn allegedly has a buyer ready to take the burden away. That isn't crisis management. That is a premeditated acquisition strategy. Let's dig into the specifics of the violations, because this is where the theory of an insider job becomes undeniable. The anonymous tip didn't just say the farm is unsafe. It cited specific code violations that are not visible to the public. It mentioned rusted support beams hidden behind facade walls. It referenced permit numbers from the late 90s that were never closed out. This wasn't a disgruntled customer. This wasn't a random drive-by. This was someone who had access to the farm's architectural history and the maintenance logs. This was someone who knew exactly where the skeletons were buried because they helped bury them, or they had read the files. Amy, in her devastation, initially accepted the narrative that she had failed. She believed the gaslighting. She thought she had dropped the ball. But there was one person who didn't buy it: Chris Merrick. As a real estate agent, Chris knows inspections. He knows how the county operates, and he knows that inspectors don't show up with that level of aggression unless they have been fed a dossier of evidence beforehand. Chris allegedly pulled Amy aside and pointed out the impossibility of the situation. He noted that the specific areas targeted were the exact areas that gave Amy leverage in the farm negotiations. If those areas were condemned, her asset value drops to zero. The tension on the farm exploded. We have reason to believe that behind closed doors, the cameras were rolling on a confrontation that the network might be too afraid to air. Matt was pushing for the liquidation. He was telling Amy that for the sake of the family legacy, they needed to sell off the dangerous assets to Caryn's contact before the press got wind of the safety hazards. They tried to frame it as protecting the Roloff name. If the public found out the farm was a danger zone, the brand would be dead. They used fear to try and force Amy's hand. But here is where the story takes a dark turn. Insider theories suggest that the anonymous tip wasn't anonymous to everyone. There are whispers of a digital paper trail. Chris began asking questions. He started looking into the public records of the complaint. While the name of the complainant was redacted, the timestamp on the email sent to the county was visible. The email was sent at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Why is this significant? Because sources claim that was the exact night Matt and Caryn were up late going over estate planning documents. The suspicion is that the call came from inside the house. The goal was to weaponize the county government to do what Matt and Caryn couldn't do legally: force Amy out by destroying the income stream she relied on. It was a siege. They cut off the supply line, the pumpkin money, and waited for her to surrender. As the days ticked down toward the canceled opening day, the atmosphere on the farm turned toxic. Amy was reportedly isolated, made to feel like she was the reason the family legacy was crumbling. Caryn played the role of the sympathetic mediator, telling Amy that she was too old for this level of stress, that she should take the buyout and go enjoy her retirement with Chris. It was classic manipulation. Break the target down, make them feel incompetent, and then offer the only way out. However, they underestimated Amy's resilience, and they certainly underestimated Chris's skepticism. We are hearing that Chris decided to run a little investigation of his own. He allegedly contacted a friend in the county clerk's office, off the record of course, to see if there was any way to expedite the repairs. What he found out wasn't about repairs. It was about the source of the information. The clerk allegedly let slip that the detailed report included photos. Photos taken from angles that no tourist could access. Photos taken from inside the loft maintenance sheds. Photos taken recently. This changed everything. This meant someone was walking the property, documenting violations, and compiling a file to send to the authorities. This was sabotage, pure and simple. The realization hit Amy like a freight train. She wasn't being negligent, she was being hunted. The farm wasn't failing, it was being assassinated. And the motive? Money and control. If Amy defaults or is forced to sell under distress, the value of her share plummets. Caryn and Matt could pick up the pieces for pennies on the dollar, bring in their developer friend, and rezone the land without Amy's interference. It was a masterclass in corporate raiding, applied to a family farm. But the plan had a flaw. They got greedy. The violations were too specific, the timeline was too tight, and Caryn was too eager. We are going to reveal the digital evidence that Amy uncovered. We're talking about a leaked email chain that blows the lid off this entire operation. We will discuss the moment Amy realized she was sleeping with the enemy, and the recording device that caught Caryn admitting to things she thought would never leave the room. The safety crisis was a lie. The trap was set. But the hunter was about to become the hunted. You do not want to miss what happens when Amy Roloff stops crying and starts fighting back. We have reached the turning point of this investigation, and this is where the story shifts from a tragedy to a thriller. If you thought the shutdown of the farm was the climax, you are mistaken. The shutdown was just the opening move in a chess game that Matt and Caryn thought they had already won. But they made a fatal error. They assumed Amy Roloff would crumble under the pressure. They assumed she would sign the papers, take the check, and disappear. They didn't count on the digital footprint they left behind, and they certainly didn't count on the fact that Amy was no longer fighting this battle alone. According to exclusive insider theories, the breakthrough happened late on a Thursday night. The farm was quiet, the attractions were dark, and the red condemned tags were fluttering in the wind, a constant reminder of the humiliation Amy was enduring. While Matt and Caryn were reportedly off-property, celebrating what they believed was the imminent acquisition of Amy's shares, Amy and Chris were digging. Sources tell us that Chris Merrick, utilizing his background in real estate transactions, urged Amy to log into the main server that hosted the farm's old email accounts. These were legacy accounts, ones used for general inquiries years ago, accounts that Matt likely forgot Amy still had administrative access to. And there it was, a digital crumb that would unravel the entire conspiracy. We are hearing reports of a forwarded email chain that had been carelessly CC'd to the general info inbox, an inbox that syncs directly to Amy's tablet. The subject line was innocuous, something like Project Safety Update, but the contents were explosive. The email wasn't from a contractor. It wasn't from a safety consultant. It was allegedly from Caryn's personal email address, sent to a private consultant who specializes in property distress and acquisition. The content of the email, as described by sources who claim to have seen the leaked screenshots, was damning. It reportedly contained a bulleted list of the exact locations the county inspectors had targeted just days later. It wasn't a list of repairs to be made, it was a list of vulnerabilities to be exploited. The theory is that Caryn had pre-identified the weak points: the rusted brackets on the wagon trail, the wood rot on the western saloon facade, and handed this roadmap directly to the people who would eventually call in the anonymous tip. Amy stared at the screen. The betrayal was absolute. This wasn't just Matt being difficult, this was Caryn actively engineering the destruction of the family business to force a sale. But instead of exploding in rage, Amy did something that terrified the opposition. She went silent. For 24 hours, she ghosted Matt. She didn't answer his calls about the developer friend. She didn't respond to Caryn's texts checking in on her mental health. She went dark. Why? Because she was gathering ammunition. We are receiving reports that during this silence, Amy and Chris were compiling a timeline. They matched the dates of Caryn's private walks on the property with the dates on the photos in the inspector's file. They matched the email timestamps with Matt's sudden urgency to sell. The picture was complete. They had them on tortious interference with business relations, a legal term that essentially means someone intentionally sabotaged a business for their own gain. But Amy needed a confession. A digital paper trail is strong, but a verbal slip-up is undeniable. This leads us to the most intense moment of the entire saga, the confrontation. Sources allege that Amy invited Matt and Caryn over to the big house under the guise of surrender. She told them she was ready to talk about the developer. She sounded defeated. She sounded tired. It was the perfect bait. When Matt and Caryn arrived, the atmosphere was thick with false sympathy. Caryn reportedly took the lead, sitting close to Amy, offering comforting words about how letting go is the hardest part, and how this developer would honor the legacy while taking the liability off their shoulders. The cameras were rolling, but what Matt and Caryn didn't know was that Amy had a secondary recording device running, her phone, face down on the table, capturing every whisper. The conversation started as expected, with Matt pushing the paperwork. But then Amy played her card. She asked a simple, innocent question. She asked, "I just don't understand how the inspectors knew to look behind the false wall in the saloon. We haven't opened that wall in 10 years. You can't see the rot from the outside." This was the trap. A normal person would say, "I don't know, maybe they used a thermal camera," or "maybe they got lucky." But Caryn, feeling confident and perhaps a little too arrogant in her victory, allegedly slipped. Theories suggest she replied, "Well, when we were looking at it last month, it was pretty obvious if you knew where to shine the flashlight." Silence filled the room. Amy looked up. "Last month? You were behind the wall last month? You told me you hadn't been to the western town in a year." The color reportedly drained from Matt's face. He realized instantly what had happened. Caryn had just admitted to inspecting the exact violation that shut the farm down, weeks before the authorities were called, and she had never reported it to the business owner, Amy. She had withheld the information, or worse, used it to craft the tip. Amy didn't stop there. She pulled up the email on her phone and slid it across the table. "And is this why you were looking? To make sure the list was accurate for your friend?" The reaction was chaos. We are told that Caryn immediately switched from sympathetic friend to defensive victim. She stood up, accusing Amy of spying on her, of hacking her emails, deflecting from the actual crime. She tried to gaslight Amy again, claiming the email was taken out of context, that she was trying to get a quote for repairs to help Amy. But the timeline didn't fit. The email was sent to an acquisition firm, not a contractor. Matt, realizing the legal exposure, tried to shut it down. He allegedly demanded the cameras stop rolling. He tried to order the crew out of the room, but the damage was done. Amy had the recording, she had the email, and she had the confession. The narrative that Amy was negligent was dead. The new narrative was that she was the victim of a corporate sabotage plot orchestrated by her ex-husband's girlfriend. This was the turning point. The power dynamic on Roloff Farms shifted in a split second. Amy wasn't the desperate ex-wife anymore. She was the plaintiff in a potential multi-million-dollar lawsuit. The safety crisis was exposed as a safety trap. But here's where it gets even more complicated. You would think Matt would apologize. You would think he would side with the mother of his children once the treachery was revealed. But insiders say he did the opposite. He doubled down. He allegedly told Amy that if she released this information, if she went public with the email or the recording, he would burn the farm to the ground himself, metaphorically speaking. He threatened to dissolve the entire LLC, selling everything to the highest bidder, leaving nothing for the kids, nothing for the legacy. He tried to hold the farm hostage to protect Caryn. But Amy wasn't bluffing this time. She looked Matt in the eye and allegedly delivered an ultimatum that sent shockwaves through the production team. She told him he had 24 hours to fix it, to get the developer to back off, to pay for the expedited repairs himself, and to publicly retract the statement about her negligence. Or else, the recording goes to the press and the email goes to her lawyer. Caryn stormed out. The nice lady mask was gone. Witnesses describe her exiting the farmhouse in a rage, leaving Matt behind to clean up the mess she started. This was the fracture we had been waiting for. The alliance between Matt and Caryn showed its first major crack. Matt was left alone with Amy, staring at the evidence of his own complicity. But the story doesn't end with Caryn storming off. Oh no. The fallout from this confrontation triggered a legal smackdown that no one saw coming. In the final part of this deep dive, we are going to break down the aftermath. We will reveal the secret deal Matt was forced to sign to keep Amy quiet. We will discuss the sudden disappearance of the safety inspectors and how the farm miraculously reopened just in time for the pumpkins. And most importantly, we will expose the revenge plan Caryn is allegedly cooking up right now. Because if you think she's going to take this humiliation lying down, you don't know Caryn. The war for the farm just went nuclear. We are now entering the final chapter of this saga, the moment where the hunter became the hunted and the power dynamic on Roloff Farms was permanently altered. Matt Roloff was left standing in the farmhouse kitchen, staring at his ex-wife, realizing that his calculated risk had just blown up in his face. Amy held all the cards: the timeline, the leaked email, and the recording of Caryn's accidental confession regarding the inspection. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was actionable legal leverage. According to legal experts we consulted regarding these specific allegations, Amy had the grounds to sue for tortious interference with business expectancy. This is a serious claim. It means someone intentionally sabotaged a business relationship or a projected income stream for malicious reasons. If Amy took this to court, she wouldn't just be suing for the lost pumpkin money. She could sue for punitive damages, legal fees, and she could name Caryn Chandler personally as a defendant. Imagine the headlines. Imagine the deposition where Caryn has to explain under oath why she was communicating with a liquidation firm about property she doesn't even own. Matt knew this would destroy the brand. The wholesome family farm image would be obliterated. Sources say the color returned to his face only when he realized he had one option left: capitulation. We are hearing reports of a frantic, closed-door negotiation that lasted into the early hours of the morning. Amy, emboldened by the evidence and Chris's strategic advice, allegedly laid out her terms, and they were brutal. First, the developer friend was to be blacklisted immediately. No more meetings, no more solutions involving selling off Amy's heritage. Second, Matt was personally responsible for covering the projected revenue loss from the days the farm was shut down. If the pumpkins didn't sell, Matt's personal account would cover the difference. This ensured Amy's liquidity was safe, removing the financial pressure they had tried to use against her. But the biggest demand was about control. Theories suggest that to make this evidence disappear, Matt was forced to sign a quiet addendum to their operating agreement. This document allegedly grants Amy significantly more veto power over future safety inspections and vendor contracts. It essentially neutered Matt's ability to pull a stunt like this again. He had to hand over the keys to the kingdom just to keep the gates open. The next morning, a miracle occurred. Or rather, a purchased miracle. Suddenly, the county inspectors, who were so adamant about the structural failures, returned to the property. With Matt now desperate to avoid a lawsuit, resources were mobilized instantly. Crews worked overnight, paid triple time, to reinforce the violations. But insiders pointed out something suspicious. The repairs were minimal. A few brackets here, a patch of wood there. It reinforced the theory that the initial crisis was exaggerated. The farm wasn't a death trap. It was just a trap for Amy. By Friday afternoon, the red tags were removed. The police tape was taken down. The safety crisis vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The farm opened for pumpkin season, and the crowds poured in, completely unaware of the corporate warfare that had taken place just hours before. The revenue started flowing again, securing Amy's position and her bank account. But where was Caryn? This is the detail that truly sells the story. For the first weekend of pumpkin season, Caryn was notably absent from her usual perch. Sources claim she was humiliated. After storming out of the farmhouse, the tension between her and Matt was at an all-time high. She had promised him a quick, clean acquisition of Amy's land. Instead, she had handed Amy the ultimate weapon to use against them. We are hearing whispers that Caryn felt thrown under the bus by Matt when he didn't defend her against the recording. She retreated to Arizona earlier than planned, leaving Matt to play the role of the happy grandfather alone. The farm was saved, but the cost was trust. Amy now knows exactly what they are capable of. She knows they are willing to weaponize the legal system and risk the farm's reputation just to get her out. She won this battle, but the war is far from over. Matt is licking his wounds, and Caryn is undoubtedly plotting her next move. A woman like Caryn Chandler doesn't take a loss like this lightly. We have received one final report that suggests Caryn has already begun contacting a new legal team to find loopholes in the addendum Matt signed. They are looking for a way to void the agreement based on duress. If they succeed, we are looking at round 2, and it will be uglier than anything we have seen before. This story is developing rapidly. The truce on Roloff Farms is fragile, and the silence is deafening. We have to ask ourselves, how long until the next anonymous tip comes in? How long until the next sabotage attempt? If you think Caryn went too far this time and that her involvement in the farm's business has become toxic, you need to share this video right now. We need to get the truth out there before they try to spin the narrative again. Hit that like button if you support Amy standing her ground. And make sure you are subscribed with notifications on, because in our next video, we are going to reveal the actual text messages Amy found on the server that we couldn't show today for legal reasons. You do not want to miss the specific words Caryn used when describing Amy. It is shocking. Thanks for watching and stay tuned. The truth always comes out.